Thanks for tuning in to keep up with our latest content. Today, we have a captivating tale about partner swapping that we believe you'll find intriguing. I turned to my wife, whom I had been married to for 5 years, and said, "Jennifer, it's him or me. There's no middle ground." She was sitting next to my nominal boss, Patrick Harris, holding his meticulously groomed hand until I spoke. She quickly withdrew her hand, and a look of shock and fear crossed her lovely face. Her head shook in disbelief, and her blonde hair shone in the lamplight. "It's just for the weekend. Everything will be back to normal by Monday. Why don't you have some fun with Lisa now?" Lisa, whose real name is Helen Johnson, sat beside me and had been trying to seduce me for hours. She's a stunning woman with luxurious dark hair and one of the best figures I've ever seen, especially if you're into curves, which I certainly am. Rumor has it, she's at the top of her game. This was all part of the plan. Patrick's joke was on Jennifer and me when we were invited to this island for the weekend. He was supposed to just want to get to know me better. I'm a well-known author, and he bought the publishing company that handles my work about 3 months ago. But in reality, the whole weekend was organized so Patrick could have an affair with my wife. I'm an average writer. I pen detective novels and thrillers. My hero is Rick Rocker. Sometimes he solves locked room mysteries, sometimes he escapes lunatics by jumping off cliffs. He also has a varied and interesting love life and is very skilled at getting beautiful women into bed. He's a martial arts expert and a trained assassin, a jack of all trades, a fantasy wrapped in a thin layer of reality, and the books sell well. However, in the publishing house, there are bigger and more popular writers. I only have a beautiful wife who catches Patrick's eye. They met at a gala and danced. Mr. Harris organized a party for his writers and editors, and it was quite impressive. Jennifer was especially taken when she and Mr. Harris danced to some live music. He's very neat and 10 years older than Jennifer's 28. He has long dark hair and is a big man. When I saw them dancing, I noticed he moved with ease. When the band took a break, they both returned to our table, and Mr. Harris said, "You have a wonderful wife, Dawn. She danced beautifully." I nodded, and my lack of reaction seemed to puzzle him for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I must attend to other guests." "It was a pleasure, madam." Jennifer responded with a smile, and I looked at her. She was undoubtedly moving too fast. When I told Mr. Harris I was married, he was really impressed with my wife. "He's simply charming." She gave me a lustful smile. "Well, let's see whose wife will catch his eye next, shall we?" It turned out to be the wife of one of the editors. Throughout the night, 3 other women caught his attention. All of this happened a month ago. My name is Donald Lake. No nicknames. I'm about 6 feet tall, weigh 169 pounds, have curly brown hair and blue eyes. I'm 30 years old. I'm in good physical shape and athletic. Jennifer is also in good shape. She practices fencing. I met her in a fencing class she was teaching. I was doing my usual research for Rick, who had to sword fight in the next book of the series. I always do thorough research before writing an adventure book, which is one of my main selling points. Rick doesn't do anything I haven't tried. I've come a long way to become a writer. I finished high school and didn't pursue formal education. I've always been a writer. I started writing stories when I was 10 and wrote many of them throughout school. 2 of my stories were published in little-known literary magazines. I considered myself a serious writer until I had to work for a living. After high school, I worked as a mechanic and liked it, but it didn't pay much. I started writing thrillers, and by some miracle, one sold, then another and another. My current publishers accepted them. They signed me after I sent them my first novel about Rick Rocker. They assigned me an editor, Sally Baker. We hit it off right away. She's very nice but deeply married. At that time, she had kids in elementary school. I met Jennifer while working on the second rocker book. I finished it after she gave me some tips on sword fighting. We went out a few times, which soon ended up in bed. In bed, everything was fantastic. We hit it off right away. Both of us were very satisfied when we met. Jennifer ran her own music store. She's not a wealthy woman and was able to get through the initial stages of the business thanks to family trust loans. One section of the store sold all kinds of instruments, and the other sold music, sheet music, and records. Fencing is just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23, and I was as happy as I could be. We had plans to have kids soon, but my publishing house was sold to Mr. Harris, or Patrick, as Jennifer calls him. One day, Jennifer came home excited. He said Donnie will be coming to visit us next weekend, and Patrick is inviting us to his island. I looked at her and said, "You mean Mr. Harris? How did you know? Why didn't you tell me?" "Oh, I ran into him by chance last week. We had lunch, then I gave him a tour of the store. Today he called with the invitation. He says he wants to get to know the writers better. I'm sure he'll be in touch with you soon. But I have a question, has he already contacted you? How many of you has he talked to?" She paled a little. "Nothing like that, Donnie. You're paranoid." "No, it's not paranoia. Tell me, why didn't you mention the lunch and shopping until today? It was last week, right?" She turned away. "Okay, Don, he tried to flirt with me. I rejected him, but I didn't mention it to you because I thought you'd get angry. After all, he's the owner of the company. And now you seem excited about the idea of visiting him on the island. I've heard about that place. How many other people will be there?" "Just you and me. He has a special friend who will also be there, and the staff, of course. All of them to get to know you better. It seems like all of this is to get to know you. All of you. How touching. I can handle it. Are you sure you can too? Come on, it'll be great, you'll see." "I'm going to decline the invitation, Jennifer. It's too dangerous for us." "Oh, Donnie, no, please. We'll have fun." "Sorry." She was angry all night. The next day, I called the headquarters and asked to speak with Mr. Harris. He called me back in 15 minutes and said, "Hello, Donald." He was eager about our weekend on the island. I told him I wasn't comfortable doing that. It seemed like my wife knew about it and I didn't. In fact, I think she had lunch with him but didn't mention it to me. She said he flirted with her and was afraid I'd react badly if she told me everything. She was right, Donald. I really appreciate Jennifer. She's very attractive, but I can ignore that. She's a businesswoman, just like me, and you're one of my most profitable writers. I just want to get to know you both better. Sorry, Mr. Harris, but I think it's a bad idea. I'm sorry you feel that way, Donald. I'd like you to change your mind. I'll leave the weekend open just in case. We said our goodbyes. About 3 hours later, when I was finishing the next Rick book, my agent, Brock Leofon, called. Donald, why did you decline Mr. Harris's invitation? Brock, the vice president of sales, called me. He thinks you should go. Otherwise, they might underpromote your new book, which will cost you a lot, and me, since we both live on commissions. Did they threaten you? Not directly, but it was implied. This guy plays hard. I told him I'd get in touch with him later. After hanging up, I sent Sally the conclusion of the new book with some instructions. Then she called me, and we discussed everything. Meanwhile, I was investigating Patrick. I did a lot of research on the island, initially called hedonism in Greek. It means pleasure, so it's also known as Pleasure Island. I found some stories of intrigue on the island, including 2 divorce cases where the island was mentioned as the base. These stories were published in tabloid magazines. There were also some pictures of Mr. Harris with women, 2 of whom were married. All of this put me on alert. I found a picture of the place on Google Maps and familiarized myself with the layout. The island is 2 miles long and about a mile wide. It's located off the coast of North Carolina among several islands where people play golf and enjoy beach vacations. The island faces south and is protected from the elements. It has 2 docks and several buildings, including a large house. There are tennis courts and a pool. Why have a pool if there are great beaches? I uploaded detailed photos of the place and converted them into a topographic map. It seemed the best way to get there was by boat or seaplane. I have neither, but I know people who do. On Friday, Jennifer came home at the usual time. She came in and was happy to see me. She had a large chicken salad and white wine. She went upstairs to change clothes. While we ate, Jennifer said, "I heard you might change your mind about not going to the island." I looked at her. "Patrick said you might change your mind over lunch. He's in New York, though we're in Virginia, where we always go on weekends. He called me. He has an apartment there." "How do you know he's in New York?" "Don't get paranoid with me. He mentioned it. He said if we agreed, he'd book his plane to pick us up at the national airport." "But we're not going to agree, Jennifer. I haven't changed my mind. This is everywhere, Donald Lake." "You're so stubborn. Jennifer, you can go. I won't be able to enjoy it there because I'll be worried we'll end up in a divorce." "Are you going to sleep with him?" "I'm not going without you, Dawn. How can you think I'd do that? If I go alone, anything could happen. And it will. When you come back, we won't be sleeping together, Donnie. I must say, I'm attracted to him, but you and I are still more attracted to each other than ever, so I wouldn't risk it." "I won't." "So, I believed you. Do you believe me?" "You don't believe me at all now." "Now I'm almost at the bottom with trust." She got up quickly from the table, spilling wine. "Look what you made me do." I started laughing at her. She realized how silly she sounded and joined me. That turned into hugs and kisses, which led to a trip upstairs. It lasted an hour. The uncomfortable topic took a back seat. While we were lying in bed, Jennifer said, "I'm not going to risk this for some millionaire. I swear." I noticed she seemed to anticipate we'd go to the island anyway. Otherwise, what risk was she talking about? She was a little tense but said nothing. I asked why she was so eager to make this trip. The truth is, it took her a while to answer. Then she said, "It seems exciting to be with such an important and influential person." "Sorry, I didn't mean to be with him. I just meant the company. I've researched him. He was born rich. Of course, he's made a lot more money himself, but he had a huge advantage. He chases women just like you." "Well, I still think everything will be fine and fun." I thought about it. We were ready to try having kids. If Jennifer was going to cheat, now would be the time to do it. And if she does, I thought, I'd want to know now, not when we have kids. I loved her once. She's smart, lively, and attractive, but she must also be honest. Now I'm not so sure. "Jennifer, we can go, but I want you to understand that if we end up with this guy, there's no going back. I'm glad we can talk about this." I decided the warning I just gave was the last. Either she was worth it as a wife or not. The temptation would be a test. Let's see what happens tomorrow. I accepted the invitation and made arrangements with my friend. I also checked for cell signal availability on the island. There is, but just in case, I brought my satellite phone. The small plane we flew from National landed at a small airport. We were greeted by a black man named Simon. He took us to the dock, where we boarded a boat with a good cabin and a powerful engine. The boat was operated by another guy. Then we met a guy named Charlie, and after about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Jennifer and I spent some time looking at the ocean and the other islands. Simon told us where we were and described what could be done on the island. He's a nice guy, a bit bigger than me, and muscular. He has a charming smile and laugh. As we approached the dock on the north side of the island, I was up front, and Simon said, "It seems you don't like this trip much, Mr. Lake." "Call me Don. I have my doubts." "How long have you been working on the island?" 6 years, 2 of them with Mr. Harris. "So I guess you know why I have doubts." "So, why did you come if you're so worried?" "Are you also his bodyguard, right?" "Yes, just in case something happens." "He's a great guy. I'm sure he can take care of himself." "Be prepared. I appreciate my job." "Are you armed?" "Well, I have a knife, but knives are everywhere." "Are there weapons on the island?" "No, they're not allowed." "I guess that's in the memo you got, right?" "Yes, but I don't trust it much. Lately, I'm not a very trusting guy." "No firearms. I warn you, you won't need it." "What happens next?" The boat was moored at the dock with Simon and a young man on the dock holding it in place. Simon shook hands with Jennifer, and I jumped off the boat. Simon seemed a bit worried about that, so I accompanied Jennifer to the big house as Simon indicated. Mr. Harris greeted us when we arrived at the house. He was casually dressed in swim trunks and a tank top. He was with the most beautiful woman in the world. I looked at her and realized there was someone else with us. That's how I knew she was actually Helen Johnson from Johnstown. She was the official lover on the island, as well as in several houses owned by Mr. Harris. She could also be seen in the company of other noblemen, but not so much lately. Mr. Harris seemed to have gotten an exclusive deal, at least in a certain sense. Mr. Harris extended his hand to shake mine, and Helen hugged me. Then she hugged Jennifer and then me again. She smelled and felt wonderful during the hug. Her lips brushed my ear. We were taken to a large room and offered drinks. It was 10 a.m., and we had a light snack on the plane, but there was a small buffet set up for us. I declined the alcohol and drank soda, while Jennifer drank wine. We both ate a bit from the buffet. While we did, Mr. Harris asked me about the book. "I sent it to Sally last week. I think it's on time." "Oh, Don is always on time, sometimes even early." He smiled. Helen asked what we were talking about. "I've read your books. They're thrillers with climbing, small plane flights, and a love interest." Helen said, "I can't wait. Maybe I can see this first." Mr. Harris supported this. "We'll see." He turned to Jennifer. "My colleague, how's the music business?" "Everything is going very well. Maybe I should say crescendo." There was some laughter. I said, "I think Marjorie's new book will sell well." Marjorie is Marjorie, who wrote serious fiction but still sold many books. "Yes, it is. She's climbing up our sales list, but still far from you, Don." Morgan, who writes as B. Starling, is a novelist. She's our best seller in the company. Morgan just bakes them. I said mockingly, but Mr. Harris laughed. "That's in my favor. I reviewed your contract last week. You owe us another book." "Yes, that's true. I was thinking of Christmas for 9 months, but it's already in full swing." Helen said, "Do you change topics?" "Sometimes thrillers need a break." Then I changed the subject. The next book is a mystery in an English village. I was researching that when we were there last summer. Helen and Patrick spoke very highly of my sales. Each book sells better than the last. Jennifer said, she's building an audience for our future. My store brings a decent profit. Helen asked, "But you have family money?" "Yes, I do. Since the store started running, I haven't touched it." Mr. Harris said, "I'm going to swim. If you're done with lunch, let's go for a swim." And he rushed to the door. Helen said, "If you have swimsuits, I'll show you your room, and you can change." The three of us went upstairs, and Helen led us to a large double room. She closed the door, and we changed into swimsuits. I wore regular swim trunks, but Jennifer put on a revealing pink bikini. "That's a bit much, isn't it? Who are you trying to impress?" "I just want to look good. Helen is so beautiful." "Not more than you, dear." She didn't like my tone, but held back. When we went down, Helen was in an electric blue bikini, as small as Jennifer's. I was completely smitten with both of them. We went out and headed to the beach on the south side of the island. There was a wooden path. Mr. Harris was already in the water, swimming beyond the breakwater. Jennifer said, "I don't want to swim that far." "Me neither," said Helen. She shivered as she said it. I plunged into the waves. I surfaced and swam to where Mr. Harris was cutting through the water with his gaze. I joined him and could keep up with him pretty well, though I'm not a great swimmer. I changed styles several times. I kept swimming until he got tired, and then followed him back to shore. When we arrived, a big wave knocked him down. I approached him and lifted him up. He spat out seawater and sand. I held him firmly and walked away. I saw his legs were like wet noodles, probably because he had exceeded his capacities in the swimming competition with me. But he quickly recovered and pulled away from my help. "I'm fine." That wave just surprised me. When we got close to the women, who were lying on loungers under the sun, I asked who wanted to swim, and Helen immediately got up, raising her hand and making her top slide a bit. She ran to the waves. I looked at Jennifer, who shook her head, and then ran after Helen. The view from there was impressive. She dove into the waves like an Olympian and swam beyond the breakwater. I followed her, and she swam better than Mr. Harris. That surprised me. We swam together for a distance, and then she shouted, "Let's go back," to which I obeyed. I was curious about the flash of flesh. I let her get about 4 meters ahead of me. I watched her profile. She turned and swam backstroke, her breasts rising and falling in and out of the water. She was an amazing woman. I swim well backstroke, so I swam alongside her for a while. Then she said that was enough and swam to shore. I waited. I looked at her from behind for a moment. When I came out of the waves, Jennifer and Mr. Harris were nowhere in sight, but Helen was looking directly at my tight swim trunks. She said, "What, are you Superman?" I laughed. "There's only one way to find out," she said, stepping towards me. Then she stopped, saying, "We can't do this here, no matter how strong my desires are." She turned and ran. On land, she wasn't as fast as in the water. I easily caught up with her, and we went out onto the deck. Jennifer and Mr. Harris were nowhere to be seen. I wondered if it had already happened. I asked, "So, do you really do what you write?" "Yes. Well, I mean, I can't jump between buildings, but I try to understand how plausible it is for Rick to do those things." Helen looked at me with that fixed gaze. My erection had disappeared, but it returned, as she expected. She was a woman with power. I said, "Helen, I'm married to a wonderful woman, and I want it to stay that way. I'm asking you as a favor. Please, don't do this." I laughed. Tongue-tied. "Oh God," I said. "Let's see what those two are doing, okay? Is that important to you?" "Oh yes, please. I want you to understand I'm not going to sleep. I'll be with you this weekend, no matter what Jennifer does. If they get to that point, I'll leave and probably regret it." I smiled. "I warn you, Dawn. I'm not easy to turn away." She went inside. I waited a few minutes before following her to our room to change, and there was no one in sight. When I entered, the shower was already running. As soon as I heard that, it stopped. Jennifer opened the door, wrapped in a towel. She gasped at seeing me and asked, "Has Helen caught you already?" "Please understand, Jennifer, I'm not going with Helen. I hope you won't go with Mr. Harris either. We talked about this. The situation remains the same. What did you two do while we swam?" He showed me the pool, the tennis court, and downstairs there's a gym. I don't think he could have passed, because it would be too risky. They didn't know how long Helen and I would be swimming. He was a gentleman. "Great, but sooner or later he'll come for you, and you know it." "Yes, and she'll come for you. He has as many chances of getting me as she does of getting you." She smiled. "That's not very reassuring, but I won't do it, and you'd better not either." "Otherwise, what?" "We already talked about drinks and snacks at 5. We had time for a bit of romance." She dropped her towel. I must admit I was still on edge about Helen, so I really got excited with Jennifer. She was also really excited. When we finished, we realized the windows were open. Jennifer said, "It doesn't matter. We're married." I looked out the window, and Helen was sitting on a lounger about 6 meters from us. She looked up, smiled, waved, and then reached for her shorts. I moved away from the window, and Jennifer noticed I was excited again. She looked towards me, then looked out the window. She stood there, spellbound for a moment. A moan was heard outside. Jennifer turned back to me, saying, "Oh God, Donnie. Forget yourself. She can have me. I can surrender." "I won't surrender." Jennifer laughed at me. "You must beg her to surrender. Otherwise, you have no chance." "I already did. It seems it doesn't work. Maybe Patrick gave her the task so he could have me. All of this is so strange, but you must admit, it keeps your interest." "Jennifer, I promise I won't do it. You help me a lot now." She looked at me. I was still excited. "We can be intimate at least every 2 hours. That should help, maybe." We went down to the main room. I wore casual clothes, khaki shorts and a collared shirt. Jennifer put on a dress and left her hair loose. She wore high heels. She undoubtedly looked fabulous. When we arrived, Mr. Harris was drinking beer. He said, "Hello, Dawn, how was the swim?" "It was great," I said. "Mr. Harris, she's a talented swimmer. She has many talents. Call me Patrick. It's a good name. He was a famous person. My late father loved reading about him." Helen came in. She was also in a dress and high heels. The dress seemed modest, but on her, it wasn't. I'm sure Jennifer felt a bit insecure. As I understand it, this was part of the game. Helen had to outdo Jennifer, who in turn would try to assert herself by getting Patrick for herself. I moved closer to Jennifer and put a hand on her shoulder. Patrick said, "There's wine, cocktails, beer, and some pretzels. Pretzels are my favorites." He said this while eating one. The 4 of us talked a bit. Then Helen took me to show me the house. It was impressive. The gym has excellent equipment. I asked, "Does Patrick use this?" She said, "He lifts weights." I lay down on the weight bench. Carefully, I lifted the bar from its rack and performed 5 repetitions. Then I put it back. Helen was standing next to me. Helen looked at me from bottom to top, then said, "He only does 3 reps, then rests." She was breathing heavily. I lifted the bar again and did 8 more reps. So each has their strengths, and you have so many. Do you know my role this weekend? I have to seduce you so Patrick can be with Jennifer. This has happened before. I always fulfill my task, although it's usually not very pleasant. But you'll be more than pleasant, I think, she said. She gave me a charming smile and asked if I would stop her if she started begging. I really meant it when I said it, but she seemed to think I was joking. "No, but I'd like to see you beg." She went up the stairs, and I waited until my erection disappeared and got up. The other three were gathered in the living room, talking. When I entered, they fell silent, then Patrick said, "Have a drink, Don." "A beer, maybe?" I looked at the bar, walked to it, took out a Corona bottle, and opened it. The others were drinking wine. We talked a bit more, then I asked, "Have you finished discussing your plot, or should I leave?" This provoked an uncomfortable silence. Both were looking at each other, mainly Jennifer. Jennifer looked at Patrick and said, "So, no secrets?" At that moment, Simon entered and announced dinner. We headed to the dining room, where the food was laid out in a buffet style. It was a family-style service. We sat at one end of a large table. We were served water, but I drank my beer and didn't drink water. Breaking the conversation, he said the tense situation he had created, and we talked pleasantly about politics and baseball. Patrick was a Yankees fan, while Jennifer and I supported the Orioles and Nationals. I liked the Pirates and am from Johnstown. Simon served dessert, tiramisu. I skipped mine. Patrick seemed to notice. "You should eat dessert. It's wonderful." "I have to watch my waistline." "You don't have an ounce of fat on you." "I saw you swimming." "You don't drink water, only beer." "Patrick, as I told my wife before we came here, my confidence is gone." "Can you blame me?" Jennifer said, "Do you think they'll catch you in something wrong?" "That's crazy." "Don't be like that, Don." I smiled and gave Patrick the glass of water. "Eat and drink, friend," I said. Patrick kept a serious face. Then he said, "Simon," and when Simon entered, Patrick said, "Please clear the table." Simon saw what had happened with the water and the tiramisu. He picked up my glass of water and my unfinished tiramisu and took them away. Helen said, "Let's go to the patio. There will be music, and we can dance." Jennifer and Patrick were silent. I got up and took Helen's hand. I led her to the dance floor. When we got there, she turned to me. "Did you really accuse him of water and food?" she said. "Do you really think he'll put something in and you'll accept it?" I wouldn't have thought, but he didn't take either and asked his bodyguard to take them away. The other two came out, and soft music started playing. I approached Jennifer, took her hand, and led her away from Patrick to an open section where we danced. She's usually an excellent dancer, but at first, she was a bit shy. When I relaxed, she moved closer to me and whispered, "I love you, Donnie." "I love you too, Jennifer." We danced until the music ended, then sat at the table with Patrick and Helen. When the music started again, Helen got up and came towards me, leading me to the dance floor. We danced, and I saw Patrick dancing with Jennifer. Helen was a fantastic distraction with her sweet, thin scent and the curves of her body. She put me in a sort of trance every time she worked with me. I was immediately captivated, and this time too. I saw Patrick's hands on Jennifer's body, but I didn't see her push them away. I moved away from Helen, walked the short distance to Jennifer and Patrick, and just stood there, looking at them. Jennifer saw me and tried to move away from Patrick. She slightly pushed his chest and said, "Patrick, stop causing trouble." He let her go, but took her hand and led her back to the table. Helen returned to me, and we sat down. She was very close to me. Jennifer was holding Patrick's hand while sitting next to him. Patrick said, "I'm very disappointed in you, Don. Helen is a fantastic lover. She will give you one of the most powerful and pleasurable experiences of your life, and you're denying her that opportunity. I have a wife. I can't change that. This is how we got to what we discussed at the beginning." I turned to Jennifer and said, "You or me, no middle ground." She withdrew her hand from his but looked at me and said, "It's just for the weekend. Everything will be back to normal on Monday. Can't you have a little fun with her now?" I looked at her intensely and said, "Will you do it, yes or no, even if it means everything between us is over. No, she said. I don't understand why that has to mean that, but I won't. I held out my hand, and she took it. I pulled her close to me and kissed her with the most ardent kiss I could. I ran my hands up and down her body. I moved away, and tears appeared in my eyes. I managed to say the words, though it was hard. The fact that you agreed to have sex with this guy means everything between us is over. Everything between us is over. I turned around and headed for the stairs. She screamed, "No, Donnie, no." I reached the top of the stairs, took my bag, which I had packed earlier, and went down the back fire escape. I called and ran in the dark, crying. I still heard the screams. About 20 minutes later, I heard a plane land on the south dock and approach me. My colleague Todd Jacobs was piloting it. I walked towards him as Patrick and Simon appeared behind me. Patrick yelled, "Oh no, idiot. You can't escape. You must stay here and calm your wife." He lunged at me. I was already on the dock. Patrick was out of control and couldn't fight. Simon stood aside, maybe because Todd was pointing a gun at him. I threw Patrick into the water. He was splashing there, shouting, "You're fired. Do you hear me? Fired." I boarded the plane. I got on board with Todd, who took us to a small lake near Dulles. I had a car there, so I paid him for the service and drove back home to Alexandria. The road was dark and lonely, and our house was dark too. I went in and looked at the photos of us in happier times and the pictures of our relatives. I was in shock and just sat in a chair, staring into space. That's how I fell asleep. At 8 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of a car outside. I looked and saw Jennifer getting out of a rental car. She brought her bag to the door, opened it, and came in. I was standing and looked at her, and she stood still, looking at me. She looked horrible, probably more than she could know. She said, "I've never been so wrong in my life, and I never will be again. I don't want to lose you, Donnie. I just don't understand what you thought would happen when you decided to let Patrick use you. Did you think I wouldn't notice because of Helen? I was a fool. I was so foolish. Well, tell me, did you and Patrick?" She lowered her head. "Not entirely." Raising her head, she continued, "He suggested that when we arrived, there might be a swap. Honestly, I saw it coming. I thought you'd say no, and that would be it. But you didn't say no. You said yes, only if I went with Helen. I saw you so interested in her. You were on her side. I thought we were going to renew our marriage and have kids, but I knew we couldn't trust each other. I saw it as a sideshow, but I thought our time together would be exceptional." I smiled. "I can understand why you thought my experience with Helen would be the best. I don't understand why you thought Patrick would be a better option than me. He excited me. He's older and stronger, and he knew how to get what he wanted from me. I never thought he'd be better than you, just different. So, Jennifer, how do I know this won't happen again? There are still many guys like Patrick in the world, and he's still. I had no intention of cheating on you, Donnie. Everything was right in front of you. I just thought you'd agree. Well, you refused her, so I know you'll never accept, as you refused her. Yes, well, I don't know. To me, you're no longer the same woman I married. She wouldn't have yielded to the temptation of another guy. Donnie, let's see what happens. We've always had great intimacy. We both miss it. We can continue like this while you spend your time not trusting me." She got up and took off all her clothes. I thought about turning away, but I didn't. She led me upstairs. "This is the only thing we have. We've always had complete intimacy. Once we're in bed, we're together." So I allowed her to come back home. 10 years later, I picked up the kids from school. Jessica is 8, Robert 6, and Helen 3. At that time, I was a house husband. I'm not sure if I was a writer at home, but I had a wonderful woman who came to help and had the opportunity to write. It took more than a year before I trusted Jennifer enough to let her go off the pills, but when she did, our intimacy flourished. I was really happy when I found out she was pregnant. I closed my contract with my previous editor, Sally, and moved to another one. The first book I wrote was about an adventure on an island. Everything was close to the truth. Well, almost. I had to hang from planes. I defeated Simon and his henchmen, then got on board. The character's wife was under the influence of illegal drugs, so she wanted the villain, but the villain was thrown into the ocean. The book sold massively and got a movie contract that included my 3 previous books. Patrick couldn't complain about the half-truths in the new book, where he was portrayed as Socrates. If he had, the truth of what happened would have overwhelmed him. Jennifer now has 2 stores. They do well, but I make much more money now that I fully accepted her back. She signed a prenuptial agreement that applies to both of us. There have been no more infidelities. The school year started, and while I was taking the 2 older ones home, a car pulled into our driveway. It was a small red sports model. Out came a pair of gorgeous legs, followed by the rest of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen smiled and greeted the kids. They ran to her, shouting, "Aunt Helen! Aunt Helen!" She hugged them and began to caress them. Little Helen greeted her at the door when she came into the house. I served her a soda, her favorite drink, and said, "Dawn will be here soon." I prepared for her a high-calorie salad, and everything was ready in her room. But that's a completely different story. What do you think of our story today? I think this story teaches us not to deceive ourselves in marriage. That's why I like this story. What's your opinion? Write it in the comments. See you in the next videos.